This is just a quick front-end tutorial on how to animate an SVG image like this. So here we have a red circle that's moving left to right, and we have a black square that's getting bigger and smaller. Now this animation is done in CSS using the CSS transition property, and I'll explain all of what that means in due course in this video. But firstly though, let's just briefly talk about what actually is an SVG. Well, SVG stands for Scalable Vector Graphics, and it's a text-based file format that describes how to create a vector-based image like this one at the start. So you can think of an SVG a bit like a recipe or a set of instructions that tell your browser how to draw that image. So this SVG here, this is the source code for it. You can open up any SVG in a text editor like VS Code. And this one is saying draw a square with this rect node, then draw a circle and then draw a line. And these are all wrapped inside this SVG tag, and that's in an SVG file. And you can open this SVG file directly in a browser like Google Chrome. The attributes on these nodes show the coordinates of the various points that need to be drawn. So that's our SVG image. Now how do we get that SVG onto an HTML page so that we can animate it? Well, there's actually 6 different ways that you can get an SVG image onto a web page. And this often confuses a lot of people because it's not super straightforward. And learning about doing it one way and then finding out that your SVG is loaded onto the page in a different way can be really frustrating. So let me just quickly go over all of the ways that you can add the SVG image onto a web page, and then we'll talk later on about which of these we need to do if we want to animate it. So firstly, you can load it into an image tag just like any other image. So this is an image tag with the SVG in the source property here. You can also use it as a CSS background image, that's a second way. And again, you use that just like any other image. So here it is inside the URL function in CSS. You can also pass the SVG into the data attribute of an object tag, and you can pass it into an embed tag as well. Now that's not very common, but that is possible. So those are the third and fourth ways you can use it. You can also load it inside an iframe like this. And finally, the method that we're going to use today, which is an inline SVG. That's where the actual SVG data is included as part of your HTML web page, and it uses the SVG tag like this. So SVG is one of the supported tags in HTML, and it says that anything inside that tag is actually SVG data, okay? So if you go back to that original SVG image file, we can actually select all of this except for that HTML tag at the top and copy and paste that directly into our HTML. So this is an inline SVG that we have here basically. We can open this HTML file in the browser and you can see that that renders the SVG just like when we opened the SVG file directly. If we open up DevTools in Google Chrome, and you can see the SVG nodes. So if we hover over these, you can see the actual nodes of the inline SVG. They're inside the DOM, just like any other HTML node on our page. Now this method of loading an SVG inline like this is the method that we're going to use today for animating it. And this is very important. If you want to start animating SVG images with JavaScript and CSS like we're going to do today, then you need to load your SVG images inline like this one here so that those individual DOM elements are in the DOM and we can control them. So how do we go about animating this? Well, if you open up DevTools and select these nodes, you can see that they have CSS styles applied to them just like any other DOM element in HTML. So I can select this circle node and I can add something like a CSS transform property onto that there. So I'm going to go over to DevTools on the right hand side and just add an inline style for CSS transform like this. So I'm going to add a scale 0.5 transform onto it, and you can see that that immediately makes that circle smaller. If we add a transition onto this too, so I'd add another CSS property on here called transition, and that's going to be transform 1 second ease. So that means whenever we change the transform property, it will smoothly transition to the next value over the course of 1 second. And then I'll change that scale value a bit, and each time we change the scale, notice how the circle smoothly grows and shrinks in size. We can also put more transforms in here. So if we added a translate function after the scale, that actually moves the circle on the page. And you can see that that also has this transition delay on it. Now this is all just standard CSS transitions that you can do with any HTML DOM node. None of this is specific to SVG. But the point here is that these CSS transitions work on inline SVGs just like they would on a div or paragraph node or anything like that. So we're getting somewhere towards being able to animate this with CSS now. All we need to do is make these changes that I'm doing manually in DevTools using JavaScript. That's fairly simple to do. I'm just going to go into this HTML file And you can see I've got the inline SVG inside the body tag like this. So if we go ahead and just create a script node, and inside there we can do some JavaScript. Now the JavaScript is going to first find the SVG element on the page using document.getElementById, and we're going to call it myImage. So we need to give our SVG node an ID of myImage. So what that's going to do is it's going to take this myImage SVG node and put it into this SVG element variable. Then from inside that variable, we need to actually start accessing the individual elements. So we can get the circle, which will be SVG element.getElements.tagName circle. And then we're going to do the square the same way. GetElements by tag name returns an array, so we're selecting the first item from the array. So this will give us access to this circle tag up here, and then this square tag under here inside our JavaScript. Cool, the next thing we need to do is set some default styles onto them in JavaScript. So I'll set the transition, the 1 second ease transformation, do that for both the circle and the square, and then I'll set an initial state for them. So circle style transform is going to initially be translate x 0 pixels. The square is going to be initially scale 1. So we're going to say that when we first go into this JavaScript, we're going to add that transformation property and we're going to reset the position on the circle to 0 pixels and the size on the square to 1, which is a form factor of 1 essentially. It's a ratio of 1. Next up, let's set up like a loop and a function that will actually change these transform properties over time. And because of the transition, changing these transform properties will cause these shapes to move about on the page, just like we were doing in DevTools manually, but we're going to do this in JavaScript now. So if I create a function in here, I'm going to call it animate objects, and inside that function, I'm going to say, if the circle transform is currently 0 pixels, then set it to, let's say, minus 50 pixels. So we're going to move it left, and the square, we're going to scale that up to 1.5 times. Otherwise, set them back to those initial values that I had. So set the circle back to 0 pixels and the square to a scale of 1. Cool. So this animate objects function, we can actually run this in the browser and we should be able to see. So if I just open this animated.html page here, which I've got open here, I'm just going to refresh that, open up DevTools. Let me just pin DevTools to the right hand side for you. Cool, so if I go to the console in DevTools, you can see I've got my script here. This is a script I've just been writing. So if I run this animate objects, it doesn't let me paste the function to the console. So if I just run animate objects in here, what that will do is it will run the function we've just written and it should move the objects. There you go. And each time I run this animate objects, it's going to move these two objects because it's going to do our if statement. It's going to say which of the two positions are we in. If we're in the first position, then move it to the second position. If we're in the second position, then move it back to the first. So there you go. So we've got a JavaScript function that animates between these two states. If you wanted to keep this going continuously, we can use the setInterval function as well. So if we do setInterval, animate objects function, and we'll do it every 1500 milliseconds. There we go, we'll save that and then refresh the page. And this is our animation that I showed you at the start, where every 1500 milliseconds it's executing our animate objects function and it's moving between these two states. And that's it basically. We've done a very basic, simple SVG animation using an inline SVG and some JavaScript. Now everything we've done here has been done by controlling the CSS transform property, but that's not the only way that you can animate stuff in CSS. You can equally animate the coordinates of the width of the height of these SVG elements. Once you've found them in the DOM with JavaScript, then it's basically completely up to you what you want to do with these. This approach of designing our animations in DevTools in the browser first can be really useful because that gives you an instant way to see what effects and CSS property will have on your image. And then it's just a case of performing the same actions that you've been doing in DevTools in JavaScript like we've been doing here. So I hope you found this quick tutorial useful. If you did, then please put a comment in the comments section below. Until next time, my name is James Charlesworth and this is Train to Code on YouTube.